Brahmanam vidadhati purvam yo vai vedangscha prahinoti tasmai tam hadevam atmabuddhi prakasham mumukshurvai sharanamaham prapadye. We who seek liberation take refuge in that infinite light which illumines the hearts of all, who is the source of Brahma himself and the repository of the infinite knowledge known as Veda. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat. Om, peace, peace, peace be unto us all. So, the topic of this morning's talk, or the topic for the day for me, for this part, for the yoga part, is the 8 limbs of yoga. And so this morning I'll speak about the foundation of yoga in 4 limbs, and in the afternoon I'll talk about the inner aspect, the purely mental aspect of yoga, the mental practices. But now I'll speak about the foundation, the foundational practices of yoga. But before I launch into that, I want to address a more general question, and that is that spiritual life is a life that has to be very, very practical. We have to be very practical in spiritual life, and that means what is practical to one is not practical to another. And so we have to find that which is meaningful to us. Yesterday, one of you asked about the place of grace and so forth in spiritual life, and why in yoga they don't talk about grace and everything, which is a very good question, legitimate question. But that made me think that I should say something about this problem of different paths and different languages and different conceptual frameworks of the different paths, and how it's useful to know each path in itself and then find what is useful for me and practicable for me. Because what does not work in spiritual life, and what often happens, especially when we're really getting into the intricacies of different paths, trying to understand them and all of that, is that oftentimes one path seems to cancel out another path. And like the idea of grace, well, it's canceled out by yoga, or it cancels the necessity for practicing yoga. Or with the 2 paths we're talking about in this retreat, the path of Advaita, the path which is the path of knowledge, self-knowledge, and the path of yoga. Then if you were to go to Ramana Maharshi, as people did, the great Advaitic realized soul, one of the great teachers, one of the greatest teachers of the 20th century, a man who's universally respected and whom I've studied a lot and continue to study because I find so much value in his teaching. But if you were to go to him and ask, revered sir, I'm practicing the yoga asanas and pranayama, and he would say, well, that's okay, but find out who is practicing, and then you'll find out there's no need to practice it. And so, again, that's good advice from the standpoint of jnana. It's not good advice from the standpoint of yoga, because it cancels out yoga. and so, during this last break, there was someone said something very, very good and very meaningful, which fed into the same thing that I was planning to say anyway. They said, Swami, when I hear the Advaita, it's so beautiful, it's and all of that. But when I read the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, it's so simple, and it goes straight to my heart. Yes, that's good. But one person loves Advaita because it's so simple. And another person hears Advaita and thinks, well, that's fine, but the Gospel is so simple. It speaks to me. Another person says, well, the Gospel is nice, it's very nice, it's full of devotion and all of that, but when I hear the Advaita, it's so simple, and it speaks to me. So in spiritual life, we have to be very, very practical and find that which is meaningful to me. And don't let one teaching cancel out another teaching. Each is good. Each is good. And if you go to a teacher of the path of self-knowledge, and that's what you want to follow, and they tell you, well, forget about the yoga asanas and all of that, because just know who you are. You don't need to. You don't need to do all of that. It's just a question of knowing who you are. That's good from the path of from the standpoint of the path of knowledge. And if you come to a yogi and like Swami Vivekananda, who taught all of the paths, but he taught them in their integrity. And so on the one hand, he would say that you don't even need to control the mind. Let the mind run where it will. I'm not the mind. Stand apart from the mind. That's all you need to do. Pure simplicity from the standpoint of jnana. But in other teachings, he said, once you know where you're going, you can forget the goal. Just concentrate on the path itself. And that's the method of yoga. Just practice. Just put your mind on the practice itself. That's all you need to do. And so that's forgetting that I'm the seer and all of that. Just put yourself into the practice. Opposite advice, and yet both work. But we have to find for ourselves that which works for me. And so one more thing in connection with that before I begin the actual text of the Yoga Sutras dealing with the yamas, niyamas, asana, pranayama, which is what we'll deal with this morning, is that the beauty of yoga, and again, each has its beauty. The path of Advaita, which is extraordinary beauty, the path of beautiful, the path of devotion, which is extraordinarily beautiful, the path of karma yoga, extraordinarily beautiful. The beauty of yoga is, and again, I don't say this to cancel out the other paths, but to understand from the standpoint of yoga, the beauty of yoga. One of the beauties of it is that we find in whatever path we're following, that the ideal looks very beautiful. The idea, that's why we're attracted to spiritual life, no? We're not attracted because we hear that spiritual life is hard and it takes a lot of practice and all of that. That's not what attracts us. We're attracted by the ideal, the beautiful idea, the ideal of spiritual life, the beauty of it, in whatever aspect, whether it's devotional or the knowledge or the practice of yoga, etc. But it's the goal that attracts us. But then we find that I'm still dealing with myself. I'm still dealing with myself. I can understand that I am and again, I'm speaking from the standpoint of yoga now, not from the standpoint of jnana yoga, which also I myself practice and love very much. But I want to speak from the standpoint of yoga now. I can understand that I am consciousness. I can understand that the whole universe exists within me. But then I find that I can't live up to that. And so then what do I do? So yoga is about what do you do when you can't live up to your ideals. It teaches you step by step how to reform the mind so that your conscious and unconscious mind are supportive of your spiritual path. One of the things that all of us, no matter what path we're on, all of us find is that, okay, so take a different path, the path of devotion. So I want to follow the path of devotion. I can understand love for God. I can understand surrendering to God. That is beautiful to me. And the great devotional saints and their ecstasy and all of that, that's extraordinarily beautiful to me. That's what I want. But then when I go to practice, I find that the mind says no. The mind doesn't want to cooperate. The conscious mind has decided, this is what I'm going to do, but the unconscious mind says, no, we're not doing that. We're doing what we've always been doing. We're going to go in the same direction we've always been going in. And I feel powerless in the hands of the unconscious mind. So I've understood the ideal, I've understood the beauty of the ideal, and yet the mind says, no, we're not doing that. And so then what do we do? Now a teacher of jnana has their method, which is good and which is effective for someone for whom that's that's the appropriate path. The path of devotion has their method, which is effective for someone on the path of devotion. And the path of yoga has its method. And the path of yoga is what we're going to deal with now in this segment, and the practices that it gives for reforming the mind, and so that what happens is if we follow the process which is given here, and again, you can follow the process of other paths and get to the same goal. But if you follow the practices that are given here in the path of yoga, you find that eventually what happens is that not only your conscious mind, but the unconscious itself becomes supportive of the path. Then you feel that the whole force of your person is going in the same direction. Most of us feel, the ordinary person feels, that, I'm using an analogy, maybe a different analogy would be more appropriate for some, but we feel like we're sitting on a garbage can, sitting on the lid of a garbage can, and inside the garbage can is a monster that's trying to get out. And so we're clutching on to keep the monster from getting out. There's no external monster. The monster that we're afraid is going to get out and gobble us up and may ruin our lives is our own latent tendencies within. But through the practice of yoga, the promise is, and the actuality is, that a time comes when suddenly you realize there is no monster in the garbage can. The garbage can is just my own mind, and the mind has become clear. The mind has become clear. There's nothing I have to be afraid of. Most of our fears are actually fears of ourselves. Fears of ourselves. And so yoga helps to get rid of those fears. And so, as I said in the first talk yesterday, yoga is process-oriented, practice-oriented, and so that's what we're going to start with now. It's a path which is good for those who want, as I said again in the first session yesterday, those who want a recipe for spiritual life, not a recipe of external things that you mix up. That would be easy. In fact, that's what many of us, especially in the West, I don't know about in India because I didn't grow up in India, though I've lived there for almost 14 years, but I didn't grow up there. But those of us in the West who come to spiritual life, most of us are looking for a recipe for spiritual life. And so the first things we want to know is what should I eat, what should I not eat, how should I dress, how should I walk, how should I sit, all of those things. So it's not that kind of recipe, but it is a recipe of you do these things and you get these results. So, coming to the Yoga Sutras, which, by the way, most of you, all of you are familiar with the Yoga Sutras, at least the fact that they exist. But the whole of the Yoga Sutra is right here. This is all that it is. Four chapters, each with just, except for the last one, which is shorter, the first 3 chapters have only a little over 50 statements. So 50 sentences. If you average them out, it'd come to about 50 or 49 statements in each of 4 chapters. That's all it is. It doesn't even make a worthwhile book as far as the number of pages that you would get, just writing it down. In fact, in India, when I got this, no, it didn't have a price on it, but it was probably, at that time, when I got this is very old, it's probably 50 paisa, something like that, which is less than a penny. So it's extremely short, and yet it's filled with so much wisdom. So now we're coming to the second chapter, which is the Sadhanapada. In fact, yesterday, the first talk was on the first 4 sutras, which come, of course, in the first chapter. And then the second lecture I gave yesterday was on Kriya Yoga and the Kleshas, which is the beginning of chapter 2. Now we're going to the end of chapter 2. We're skipping over a number of important sutras. But again, even though it's a very short text, it's long enough to take a year to really go through. If we really went through and studied it sutra by sutra with all of the implications and so forth. So it's profound if short, and that was the purpose of it, to make something that was a few words, as few syllables as possible, but with the maximum intent, the maximum meaning. So when we come to the second chapter, Sutra 28, that introduces the topic. And, I'm sorry. I keep saying, okay, now for the sutra, and then I keep backing up and saying something else. There is one other thing I want to say, referring back to something I said yesterday, and that is that the Ashtanga Yoga, the 8 limbs of yoga, which is what Patanjali is most famous for, that not many, but some people, some scholars think, and it seems very reasonable, that this was actually quoted by Patanjali in the Yoga Sutra. It was not his original work. The Kriya Yoga was the main teaching of Patanjali. Now, why do we say that? Or why did I say that? Why did I refer to these teachers who say that? It's because when you look at the text of the Yoga Sutras, when you study it analytically, you can take out all of the matter on the 8 limbs of yoga, and you still have a comprehensive text where you don't even know that anything was missing, unless you knew beforehand that the 8 limbs of yoga were there. You can take out the 8 limbs without it affecting the rest of the text, and you still have a text which goes from the beginning of spiritual life to the end. So that doesn't mean that the Ashtanga Yoga is meaningless. That's why I'm speaking about it today, because it's full of meaning and full of value. But just that it seems to have been added in by Patanjali, because it's so full of meaning, but as something which is a separate tradition from the Kriya Yoga tradition, which was his own. So now coming to Sutra 28, which is the beginning of the Ashtanga Yoga. It says, Yoganganushtanad ashuddhikshaye jnana diptihi aviveka khyatehi. Well, that means that by the practice of the different limbs of yoga, the 8 limbs of yoga, the impurities ashuddhikshaye, the impurities being destroyed. When the impurities of the mind are destroyed through the practice of the 8 limbs of yoga, then knowledge becomes effulgent up to the attainment of the highest knowledge, to the knowledge of the ultimate discrimination, that is between the seer and the seen, where you come to the point where that discriminative knowledge between the seer and the seen, which Swami Atmarupananda has spoken so beautifully about, when that becomes known. So again, the purpose of Ashtanga Yoga is stated here. The purpose of the 8 limbs of yoga is stated here. Ashuddhi Kshaya, the destruction of the impurities of the mind. So that's what I was talking about, that we have, again, you may find another metaphor which is more appealing, but most of us have this sense that we're sort of sitting on a garbage can in which there's a monster, and we're afraid the monster is going to get out. Until a time comes when, through the purification of the mind and heart, then we realize that there never was a monster. There never was anything that was going to overpower me and overpower my life if I wasn't careful. It's a relative freedom, but it's a wonderful state of freedom. Relative freedom is not the highest freedom, but it's a wonderful state where you feel confident in yourself. You don't feel that something within yourself is going to sort of take over your life and ruin it for you. The feeling of self-confidence, atma-shraddha, faith in yourself, because you feel now that no, there's not something within my unconscious mind which is pushing me in directions I don't want to go. You feel that the unconscious mind itself is beginning to support your path. So now in Sutra 29, he names what those 8 limbs are, and probably all of you know of the 8 limbs. That is Yama, Niyam, Asana, Pranayama, Pratyahara, Dharana, Dhyana, Samadhayo, Ashtav Angani. So the 8 limbs are Yama, Niyama, Asana, Pranayama, Pratyahara, Dharana, Dhyana, Samadhi. Those are the 8 limbs. And so then it comes to describing what those 8 limbs are. And so he begins, of course, with the first, which is Yama. The yamas, the 5 yamas, are the moral disciplines of self-control. And those are Ahimsa, Satya, Asteya, Brahmacharya, Aparigraha. These are the yamas, he says in Sutra 30. So those translated means, Ahimsa means non-killing. So that sounds easy. I never killed anybody so far, so I'm doing pretty good. Okay, I got the first one. But non-killing, of course, doesn't mean just not killing. It means not doing harm to others. And so you may say, well, I'll come back to that, because then we'll take them individually. So non-killing, and then satya means truthfulness, being truthful in thought, word, and deed. And then asteya means non-stealing. But in yoga, greed itself is stealing. Greed itself is stealing. Wanting something which is not yours and trying to get something that is not yours. That doesn't mean going out and buying something. That's not stealing, of course. But being envious and being greedy, that is a form of mental stealing. And then brahmacharya. And here, of course, comes the problem for many, because again, it sounds like Vedanta is against family life and against having children, and brahmacharya means celibacy, means sexual control. But no, that's something that all of us in life have to practice to some extent. The brahmacharya for a monastic is different from brahmacharya for a householder. People don't get married in order to practice brahmacharya. That's in the absolute sense, in the monastic sense. That's why a householder is a householder and a monk is a monk. So brahmacharya for a householder means that there has to be some control. And marriage exerts a firm control. When marriage is strong, it exerts a firm control. That is, if I have a strong marriage and if I have a good marriage, then I know that this is my partner. And a physical relationship with my partner is a natural part of my life. But when my eyes start wandering and I see other potential partners, I say, no, I have a wife or I have a husband. This is the person that I have committed to. And so that itself is a tremendous control, a tremendous control. So brahmacharya for a householder means that. It also means, and let me tell a little story to express what I'm going to say next, what it also means. This was many years ago when I was living here in San Diego, I think it was. It might even have been before that, but I think it was when I was in San Diego. There was an article that came out in Time magazine, and Time magazine said that there's this new problem that psychologists have discovered in the population, which is so insidious that people don't even know that they have the problem. And that is that there are many people, including married couples, who just don't have any interest in sex. They don't have any interest in sex. They may have sex very rarely, or sometimes some married couples don't even have it at all. And they've been studied and found that oftentimes these people are good husbands or wives. They're good parents to their children. They're good at their job. They seem happy and well-adjusted. And this is a tremendous problem because they don't know that they've got a problem. And so therapists are teaching them how to fantasize and to create desire and all of this because it's such a problem that these people don't even know that they have. And the problem is that they don't know that they have a problem. And so they've got to be taught that they have a problem. No. If your sexual desire decreases, feel yourself fortunate. Feel yourself fortunate. There's one less thing that you have to exercise your mind about. And so brahmacharya, for those living in the world, means, first of all, have a committed relationship. And in that committed relationship, then know that this person is the person with whom I have whatever physical relations I have. And when my eyes wander to somebody else, no, bring it back here. Bring it back here. That's one of the things with any kind of desire, is that we want variety. And so that happens with sexual desire as well. I want variety. No, I've committed to one person. This is the person that I've given my life to. This is the person that I'm committed to, and this is where I'm going to stay. That itself is a tremendous renunciation. And then, if you find over the years, it can't be expected in a newly married couple or something. That's fine. That's what marriage is. That's part of marriage. That's part of the value of marriage. But with time, if you find that your interest begins to diminish, feel yourself lucky. Feel yourself lucky. Feel that that's one less thing that I have to worry about. One less thing that I have to give myself to. And then you'll find that you have more energy for other things. I read a book once many years ago when I was living in Ganges, Michigan, our monastery in a town. The name of the town from the 1850s is Ganges. Nearby is Nirvana, Michigan, and near that is Delhi and also Baroda. These four tiny little villages. Like Nirvana only had about 200 or 300 citizens living in it. There are not many people like Nirvana. And Ganges only had 2,000, so they're not much better. But when I was living at the monastery in Ganges, Michigan, I got this book on how to be a writer. because I had, from childhood, I had this idea that I would like to write. And so I checked out from the library a book on how to be a writer. And on the cover was a man handsome-looking man who was a writer, and the author of this book, the author's picture on the back. And he was smoking a cigarette with one of those, I forget what you call it, but the cigarette holder. The cigarette holder, the long holder with a cigarette out there. And he's got a martini in one hand, a cigarette in the other. And so he didn't look like the typical spiritual aspirant. But the book was very good, excellent book. And in that, the one thing I remember from that book, and I've always remembered, is he said, if you want to be a writer, learn to lust after your typewriter. Don't spend all of your energy in sexuality. Learn to lust after your typewriter. That was wonderful advice. If you want to be an artist, if you want to be a writer, if you want to start a business, you have to have psychic energy to do that. And so if you waste all of your energy just in the excesses of sexual expression, then you find you won't have it. You won't have it. And so again, brahmacharya means one thing to a householder. It means another thing to a monastic. But for everybody, some sort of control of sexuality is necessary. Otherwise, you can't lead a normal life. Have you ever met, and I'm sure many of you have ever met a person who's obsessed with sex? I mean, absolutely obsessed, to a point where it's obviously a disease. It's somebody that's just pitiable. If you ever see such a person, and I've met a few, who are just obsessed with it. They couldn't think about anything else. They couldn't talk about anything else. They couldn't seek anything else. It's a miserable situation. People who think of sexuality as joyful, yes, certainly. But if anything that goes to excess, it becomes a source of tremendous misery. Tremendous misery. These are some of the most miserable people I've ever seen. They can't think about anything else. They can't talk about anything else. I'd give you examples, but they're too gross. The examples themselves are too gross, but it's really pitiable. So recognize that for all of us, some degree, which is different from different people, but some degree of control is essential just to lead a normal life. And all of you are already doing that. None of you that are here are obsessed with it, but just recognize that that's good. And when society presents the ideal that the summum bonum of life, and that which everybody really wants in life is just sex, say no to it. Say no to it. Say no, there's more to life than just that. More to life than just that. But that's a surprising thing in society, is that sexuality is presented so much as the one thing to have. Other things are just sort of extras that you can, when you can't engage in sexuality, you can do some other things just to keep busy. But that's just to keep busy until you can get back to the real thing. No. Know that it has its place in life. It has its place in life. It's not dirty and not nasty and not sinful. But there has to be some degree of control just to lead an ordinary life. And if you want to lead a creative life, artistic life, musical life, as an actor or actress, if you want to be a writer, if you want to be a great scientist, if you want to be a spiritual aspirant, some degree of control is necessary just in order to develop, just in order to grow. It's essential for everybody. The unfortunate thing in the West has been that since the late 19th century, we have the idea that an artist, to be an artist, has to be completely dissolute. Being an artist means that you have no control, you just spend yourself in excess, that's what an artist does. No, that's not what an artist does. And that was never the idea in the West before. It was never the idea with the great artists of the West, the Michelangelos and the Leonardo da Vinci's. No, they weren't celibate monks. But it was known that in order to be a creative person, you had to have some control. And that's still true. And so, brahmacharya is one of the 5 yamas, and it means different things to different people. But it means to all of us some degree of control and not being obsessed. Now, strangely, it's the 5th and last that's mentioned, which is the biggest problem to people. Aparigraha, not receiving gifts. I don't know how many times people studying yoga and everything, they come to, well, Swami, everything's okay, but why can't I receive any gifts? And can I give gifts? Can I receive gifts? Why not? Well, no, this also has to be taken in context of your own life. You know, your mother gives you a birthday present and you say, no. Take it back, Mom. Are you trying to make me a worldly person? No, I'm a yogi. No. No. Your husband or your wife gives you something? No, you accept it. The idea is that if you accept gifts from people that have strings attached, and many gifts do have strings attached, then it affects your mind and it takes away the freedom of your mind. You can no longer say that which, and that's the whole idea behind finance reform of politics. Because when politicians are getting tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars from corporate donors and so forth, then the corporations are not giving money to politicians just because they are generous people and have too much money and want to give it away. No, they're giving it away with the idea that with it will come some influence. With it will come influence. And so for politicians, the idea is that if we could get financial reform of politics so that money doesn't come from corporations, then that would take away their power. Or if there were public financing of elections, then politicians could act more independently. Complete independence for a politician, that's not going to happen, but more independently. And so it's the same principle here. That if you accept things where strings are attached, it's going to affect your mind. And yes, there are some people who follow yoga very strictly, who won't accept any kind of gift practically from anybody. They just will not do it, and that's okay too. If you can practice that and you want to practice it, that's fine. In the Christian world, in the Eastern Orthodox Church, in Greek and Serbian and other Orthodox Christian churches, they're what are called the zealots. And the zealots are those who follow the letter of the law because they want to be extremely strict about everything. And so if you want to be a zealot in your yoga, that's fine. Don't force it on other people. That's the problem with zealots. They become so enamored of their own observance that they want to force it on everybody. But if someone wants to practice to the letter of the law, then fine, don't accept any gifts. But it's not telling all of us that none of us should accept any gifts from anyone, but it does mean that don't accept gifts that have strings attached, because the string is tied to your own mind. If somebody gives a gift with a string attached, it's not a string attached to something out there, it's attached to your own mind, it's tied to your mind. And so don't allow that. So, non-killing, truthfulness, non-stealing, continence, that is sexual control, and non-receiving are called the yamas, the 5 yamas. Let me stop for a moment and ask, when did I start?
11:50.
I started at 11:50.
Until 12:35.
12:35? Oh, I've got a long time. Actually, I don't. I don't have much time. So I'll speed up a little bit. But then he says, Ete jati desha kala samayana vachinnaha sarvabhauma mahavratam. These 5 practices of the yamas. It's like Swami Atmarupananda's the 4 disciplines of jnana, where there are only 8 limbs of yoga, but the first 2 have 5 each. so these 5 yamas, eti jati desha kala samaya anavachinna, unbroken by birth, that is your circumstances of your birth, your ethnicity, your culture, etc. Desha, where you were born, the kala, when you were born, what era, what historical period, and samaya. I've forgotten the special sense of samaya here. I have to look that up again. I had it in mind and now it's gone. Let me look for a moment. The circumstances, yes. The circumstances of your life. These are sarvabhauma. That is, they are universal. So these great vows are universal great vows, unbroken by circumstances of time and place and ethnicity and culture and so forth. That is, these are universal principles. That they're not meant to just for somebody in ancient India or whatever. They're applicable in ancient times, they're applicable today. They're applicable in India, they're applicable in Africa, they're applicable in America, in Japan, etc. That these are universal great laws, unchanged by the circumstances of your birth. So, that means that if you want to be spiritual, these are things that in some form or another you have to begin to internalize. You have to begin to internalize. Realize that yoga is a practice, and a practice is a process, and a process takes place over time. So many people, when they come to spiritual life, they hear about conditions like these, and they think, well, that's so far from me that I might as well just give up. Well, no, this is something that you gradually begin to practice and you internalize. You have a lifetime, you have lifetimes to practice. So don't let the circumstances or the high ideal scare you away from spiritual life. No, you begin to, and again, these 5 things that are to be practiced, you'll find that you have to practice these 5 things just to lead an ordinary, happy, worldly life. You can't even be happy in ordinary life without practicing these things. And in spiritual life, it's even more important. So in spiritual life, you emphasize them even more, and you perfect them even more than in ordinary life. And then he talks about, in Sutra 32, he talks about the niyamas. The niyamas. Shaucha, santosha, tapa, swadhyaya, yeshwara pranidhanani, niyamaha. The niyamas are shaucha. That's internal and external purification, and I'll come back to that. Santosha, contentment. How can you find peace of mind if you don't have any basic contentment in life? If you're always feeling discontented with everything in life, you can't find happiness. Tapa, swadhyaya, ishvara pranidhana. These are what I put on the board yesterday and talked about yesterday afternoon, the Kriya Yoga. Tapas means austerity, that is self-control, practice of self-control. Swadhyaya, self-study, study of the scriptures with a view to what does this mean to me. And the repetition of a mantra is also part of self-study. And then Ishvara Pranidhana, devotion to God, or better, surrender to God. Surrender to God. It includes surrender of the fruits of your actions to God, which is the essence of karma yoga. So the essence of karma yoga. So karma and bhakti both are included here in the niyamas. Ishvara Pranidhana. Karma and bhakti are both included in this. So these internal and external purification, contentment, austerity, study, and worship of God are the niyamas. And then we come to 33. It says vitarka badhane pratipaksha bhavanam. Pratipaksha bhavanam is an important principle in yoga. That means countering bad thoughts, vitarka badhane, countering bad thoughts with their opposite. Countering bad thoughts with their opposite. So if you want to harm somebody, then you try to instead send out loving thoughts. Having already thought, you can't do that just in the moment because somebody tells you to. You want to punch somebody in the nose and you say, well, no, I'm going to send loving thoughts to them instead. Why would you do that? You want to punch him in the nose, so you go ahead and punch him in the nose. But no, if you've thought beforehand and you've thought deeply that no, by causing harm to others, by getting angry, I'm really hurting myself, so let me control that. Then once you have that idea firmly in your mind, then when you're confronted with a situation where your instinct is to hurt somebody, then no, you can raise the opposite thought. No, let me not do that. There was a beautiful life of Saint Seraphim of Sarov, a Russian Orthodox saint who lived in the last part of the 18th century and in the early 19th century. He was a great saint, a very great saint. And there's a book of his life called Flame in the Snow, written by a Russian woman who heard the popular stories about Saint Seraphim from villagers and people who had passed down the lore of him, and it's a much more beautiful life than the standard biographies of Saint Seraphim. as a much fuller life. And in that, it tells of Saint Seraphim when he was living out in the steppes of Russia, far from civilization, living in a hermitage, just following his own spiritual life, the life of a hermit. And one day, two robbers came and saw the hermitage, and they had the idea, which was part of Russian folklore, that hermits kept huge hoards of gold in their hermitages. And so they thought, here's a hermit, he must have a huge pot of gold in his hermitage. And so Saint Seraphim was out chopping wood. And so the brigands came, or the thieves came to him, and they were about to attack him. And so he was chopping wood, so he raised his axe to defend himself. And then suddenly he thought of Mother Mary, the Virgin Mary. And then he dropped the axe and just prayed to her. And they hit him over the head, broke his back. The rest of his life he was bent over. But for the rest of his life he prayed and did austerities for the welfare of those thieves. So that's an extreme example. That's not something that I'm saying you should do. That's an extreme example. But it illustrates the point that that in the moment, because he had trained himself, that the first instinctive action was to chop him over the head with an axe. But then he said no. And then he thought of the Virgin Mary instead. And yes, that didn't save him. It didn't save him. He was injured badly. It took many months for him to recover so that he could even function. But in our life, we don't have to go to that extreme. That's not something that you can think, well, if somebody comes to me, then I'll just pray to the Virgin Mary and let them kill me or whatever. No, you have a right to defend yourself and all of that. But in lesser situations where you want to hurt somebody, if you've practiced, then you can change that reaction by thinking the opposite thought. If you want to take something from somebody, you can change that reaction by thinking the opposite thought. And so pratipaksha bhavanam is a psychological principle which is extremely helpful. It helps us to train ourselves in the proper reaction that we want to have towards these things that are impulsive actions which cause us trouble all the time. 5 minutes, okay. Now that's 5 minutes until the 45 minute, right?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure this was not the last 5 minutes. This is the first 5 minutes. Okay. So in the Pratipaksha Bhavanam, it gives you a way of retraining your mind so that you can give a proper reaction to the situation. And what I was going to say was that if you have thought through things and so forth, then when you feel yourself getting angry, then if again you have a moment where suddenly you realize, oh, I'm getting angry again. Because you've reflected, you've watched your behavior, you've been self-reflective and everything, and you can see this situation always pushes my buttons. I get angry, and then afterwards I feel bad because it really didn't help anything. So then when the button is pushed and you start to get angry, a time comes when you catch yourself and say, I don't need to get angry. It's not going to help anything. There may be something I need to say. So this doesn't mean excusing abuse. No, you don't gain anything by letting people abuse you. No, never let anyone abuse you in any way. But it does mean that when there are reactions you have, like anger to a situation, you just make a decision. Eventually you can make a decision that I'm not going to get angry under any circumstance. I may have to react in some way. I may have to respond in some way to stop an abusive situation or something. But I'm not going to let my mind get into that wave of anger. That may take 30 years, may take 40 years of practice, but you can do it. And you can begin doing it and you'll find an immediate help. It gets, the reactions get less. And so just knowing that, no, I don't want to let a wave of anger rise in my mind, that is not suppression. If you suppress your anger because you're trying to be nice, that is a bad thing. Then it's better to express your anger. Don't suppress your anger unconsciously because you want to be nice and you want people to think that you're nice. That's social niceness, which gets you into trouble. So then it's better just to get angry. But If through practice you've gotten to the point where you can begin to control anger, then you can still respond appropriately when someone is doing something that you have to stop, but you can do it without anger. You can even say harsh words, but you can do it without anger inside. And so Pratipaksha Bhavanam is a very important psychological principle. Let me skip over 34. Let me come to the definitions of these. Ahimsa pratishtayam tat sannidho vairatiyaga. When you are established in non-injury, in non-killing or non-injury, ahimsa, when you're established in that, then in the presence of a person who is established in it, others renounce the idea of doing harm. The idea of doing harm is renounced by others. And you know many stories from saints around the world, so many stories that they have, some of them have to be true, of saints around whom animals lost their natural tendency of aggression, predator animals and so forth. There are many examples of that. And so it's true with people also. And I've seen that in a minor example, but it was a very beautiful example for me. Once when I was where was I? It was when I was living in San Diego. No, it was when I was in Ganges, Michigan. Swami Atmarupananda, a great saintly Swami of ours who long passed away. He was a disciple of Holy Mother and a very saintly man. He had come, and Swami Hiramananda, another Swami who is a trustee of the order, had come from India. So Swami Atmarupananda had come from Portland, Swami Hiramananda had come from India. And I took the both of them to see Lake Michigan, and which was near the Ganges Monastery. So we drove to a place where we could park, and I had not been to this particular place before and didn't know that you had to pay for parking. And in those days, I had no money. I never had any money. I was given any money to carry for anything unless it was specifically for shopping or something. So I had nothing in my pocket before the days of credit cards and so forth. So I get up to the booth, and the man says, that'll be $5 or whatever it is, $10, whatever it is. And so I said, I didn't know that we had to pay to park here. I was just going to show them the place. So can I just turn around and go out and we'll find some other place? And the man said, no. You can go inside and park. You can stay all day for free. Do you know why? I said, no, I have no idea why. Because of the beautiful smile on that man. You can go in and stay the whole day without paying anything. I was pointing to Swami Atmarupananda. Just seeing this man smile. He was not a beautiful looking man by Hollywood standards. But this man saw something in his smile and said, no, you can park all day for free. These things are real. These things are real. So one who is established in ahimsa has that. And then satya pratishtayam kriya phala shrayatvat. By the establishment of truthfulness, the yogi gets the power of attaining for himself and others the fruits of work without the work. Now that's a strange statement. So let me unpack it. That when one is established in truth, then one's words become a truth. Let me start over. When I practice truthfulness, I try to make my words conform to facts. I try to tell the truth. That is, something happened, I try to be truthful about it. But when one is established in truth, then one's words become true. One's words become true. And that you see so many examples in the life of the Holy Mother. You see it in the life of Ramakrishna. So many times that whatever they thought, it came true. You don't need to think of it as psychic powers. They weren't using or exercising psychic powers. It was because they were so truthful that whatever they said came true, because they were established in truth. And so the power of truth. So for us, truth is a practice. Why should we practice truth? Because if we want to live in the truth, then we have to come to terms with the truth. It starts with a verbal commitment or commitment to verbal truth. I'm going to tell the truth. But eventually it goes much deeper than just to telling the truth of the way things happened. I want to, if I know something is true, a spiritual principle, if I know that I am consciousness itself, then I want to act according to that. If I know that everyone is an image of the divine, then let me behave with them as if they are divine, even if I don't see it yet. But I know it's true. I've thought about it. I've understood it. So I know it's true. I don't see it yet, but I know it's true. I can understand it. So now let me behave according to that. So that also is truthfulness. Asteya pratishtayam sarva ratnopasthanam. By being established in non-stealing, then all jewels become available to the person. Now that sounds very strange also. These particular sutras sound very strange, the last one and this one. It means that by jewels it means the best of everything. That if you have no envy, no greed, no desire to take things which are not yours, then everything comes to you. And there are many examples of that also. That when one is completely free from envy, then for one thing, people trust you with anything. There's a wonderful story of Swami Vivekananda that when he was in Chicago, during his early days in Chicago, and before he was well known from newspaper exposure and so forth, he was on the Lakeshore Drive, which is still there in Chicago, and there was a woman who saw the Swami there, and she had her young, very small daughter in a stroller. And she remembered something that she had forgotten in the store, and she had to go run and get it. And so she went up to the Swami and said, "Can you watch my daughter? Here's a foreign man wearing a turban, dark skin, which in those days was looked on with great suspicion." And she went up and gave her daughter to Swami Vivekananda, ran out of sight, and came back after some time. And I forget the identity of that daughter, but that daughter later, who didn't even know who Swamiji was, she was just a tiny, just an infant. She later became a devotee. But her mother, spontaneously seeing Swami Vivekananda, she trusted him and said, "I can leave my daughter with this man," and so she did. So by establishment of non-stealing, all wealth comes to the yogi. Brahmacharya pratishtayam virya labha. By the establishment in continence, energy is gained. And then aparigraha, when aparigraha is established, one attains to the knowledge of one's previous births. That means that when one has no string, when one is not indebted to anyone, one doesn't feel indebted to anyone, the mind becomes independent. And with that comes the ability to remember one's previous births. So, internal and then he goes for the niyamas, and I'll ask, no, there's not time for all of this because I want to leave time for question and answers. I'll go over some of these, the niyamas, in the beginning of the next session in the afternoon, but let me come to asana and pranayama. No, I won't do it that way. Let me back up and say, let me finish the niyamas, and then I'll begin with asana and pranayama because those are important. I can't leave them out. So about the niyamas, he says, Shocha, that he tells what they are, and then says, Sattva Shuddhi, Somanasya, Ekagrya, Indriya Jaya, Atma Darshana, Yogyatva. So there also arises, I forgot number 40. Shochat, Swanga Jugupsa, Parayir Asamsarga. From internal and external purity, cleanliness, arises disgust for one's own body and connection with other bodies. That is, when you are clean, internally and externally, then you realize that the body by its nature is dirty. The body by its nature is always needing cleaning. And so you begin to feel a disgust for physicality. You begin to feel a disgust for physicality. It's just a matter of fact that you find that if you spend a long time in very dirty circumstances, your own body and your surroundings, you begin to get used to dirt and the smell of bad things, and you don't even notice it anymore. So if you remain clean, and if you clean your mind also by thinking good thoughts, then you find that physicality becomes less and less important. It becomes less and less attractive to you. And so the value to the yogi in cleanliness is that it establishes you in that sense of physical autonomy, And then in 41 he says, there also arises purification of the sattva, that is the sattva quality of the mind, the buddhi. Cheerfulness of the mind, concentration, conquest of the organs, and fitness for the realization of self, all from cleanliness. As Shakespeare said, cleanliness is next to godliness. And so it's that idea, that through cleanliness, the mind becomes cheerful, the mind becomes pure, the sattva quality of the mind becomes clarified. One attains more easily to concentration because the mind itself becomes more organized. The idea of when you lead an orderly life, the mind itself becomes orderly. And you attain to fitness for realization of the self. So as Swami Vivekananda used to say, this idea that some have in the West, that a spiritual person is one who doesn't care about their body to the point where they don't care about cleanliness and so forth also, that's not yoga, that the yogi has to maintain physical and mental cleanliness. And then 42, santoshad anuttama sukhalabha. From contentment comes superlative happiness. If you learn to be content, contentment comes from what? From knowing that what I need, the universe will provide. One of the things we need to acquire in spiritual life is faith in the universe, that the universe will provide that which I really need. What I really need. If it's not going to provide everything I want, but what I really need is going to be provided. And so if I have that firm faith, then I can have santosha. That which comes to me, okay, that's okay. It came to me, I'm satisfied with that. That doesn't mean that you can't improve your circumstances if you're able. It doesn't mean that you can't take a better job if you get an offer of a better job. But if there's just empty ambition because nothing is never enough, then nothing is ever going to be enough. Then there's no possibility of calmness of mind. So this doesn't mean that you can't ever do anything to improve your life. No, you can. But whatever you have and whatever you get, then you remain satisfied with that. And if something else comes to you, then yes, you can take advantage of it because it has come to you. But to always stay in a state of dissatisfaction. I still remember when I was a little kid, my aunt was a good person, but this doesn't reflect well on her. Not really, not badly, but it's certainly not in a yogic way. It doesn't reflect on her. But my aunt was very loving to me, and I loved her also. But when I was a kid at my grandmother's house, where my aunt also lived, we lived next door to my paternal grandparents. One day we'd eaten Sunday dinner, and I'd eaten everything on my plate. And so then my aunt said, well, do you want some more green beans? And I thought for a minute and said, yeah, I can eat some more green beans. Said, you have to ask for things. Nobody in life is ever going to give you things. You have to take things. Nobody is going to give you anything in this life. You have to go out and get it. If you want green beans, you have to ask for it. And I was so surprised. I thought, I didn't really want green beans. You asked me, and so I thought about it, and I thought, well, yeah, I could eat some more because they tasted good. I would have been perfectly happy without them. So in life, we're taught that, no, you have to demand things, you have to ask for things, you have to grab things. No, we don't. We don't have to. That yes, you can improve your life. You can do things to improve your life. But learn to be contented with that which comes to you. And if opportunities come to improve your life, yes, you can take them. That's no harm. But don't be chronically dissatisfied with everything. People come into a restaurant and the first thing they do is to call the waiter over and say, can you turn the music down? Can you open the window? Can you move this table over there? Can you turn up the air conditioning? And nothing on the menu satisfies me, so can you change all of the items on the menu? No. Learn to be comfortable with whatever circumstances you're in. Yes, if you're in your own car and you turn on the air conditioning, that's fine. Then it's under your control. You can adjust it as you like. If you're in the car with other people and somebody wants it a little warmer than you do, then you just learn to be okay. You know, that's okay. I don't need to have it exactly my temperature. That's okay. We're good to go. So just very briefly, and then questions. The next one is the result of tapas, that is, of austerity, is bringing powers to the organs and the bodies by destroying the impurities. So by tapas, that is, by self-control, we bring purity to the body and the mind, and it generates power. The very idea of the Sanskrit word tapas comes from tap, to burn. And so tapas is that which generates psychic energy within us and spiritual energy within us. And then 44, about swadhyaya, by the repetition of the mantra comes the realization of the intended deity. So by repetition of the mantra swadhyaya, scriptures with reference to what does it mean to me, and the repetition of a mantra comes the realization of the intended deity. And that also has already been explained, that it also brings about internalization of the mind. It internalizes the mind. And then last, Ishvara Pranidhana, sacrifice or surrender to God. By sacrificing all to Ishvara comes samadhi. So samadhi itself, the highest concentration, comes by sacrificing everything to Ishvara. So now let me stop here, and I'll begin next time with asana and pranayama, and then go on to the mental disciplines. So let me see for question and questions, whatever questions you might have. There's one back here. There are three back here.
Which one first?
It doesn't matter. I saw him first, but yeah, give it to Gertie. That's okay. Then she can pass it.
My question is just that all these things, the yamas and niyamas, don't they, even if we don't practice directly Patanjali Sutras, if we do, say, japa or whatever, what's your thought on, well, they will all happen? I think we will give up things, we will acquire good qualities. I would like your opinion on that. Even by
Yes.
just doing japa.
Yes. That's the value of, or that's the value of all spiritual disciplines, that if you follow any one spiritual discipline, a genuine spiritual discipline, gradually it involves other things also. And so by doing japa, you'll find that because you're thinking of spiritual thoughts, and because the mantra has its own vibration which purifies the mind and body, then just through that you begin to get the yamas and niyamas. That alone. And so again, what Patanjali has done is to spell out things. These are the things that are going to help you, but it's not that you have to practice them as separate disciplines. They can be practiced through through something like the devotional practice of japa. That will include the yamas and niyamas. That's very true. That's a very good point. Thank you. And then right here, yes. And then, and you'll be next, and then here.
Swamiji, I found your discussion of non-acceptance of gifts having tremendous interest in consequences. It's also discussed the giving of gifts. In this world, almost always, when people give to others, they expect something in return. And there is that remark in the Gita that even a leaf offered in the proper spirit is enough.
Yes.
So the giving of gifts also in this world almost fuels everything. People always want to give in order to receive.
Yes. No, that's very true. That's very true. So gift giving, it does all of these things. If you begin to look at them, they're tied to bigger and bigger issues. You look at something like truthfulness, okay, I'll just tell the truth, I'll be honest, that's okay. But you look at it and you see that it's tied to more and more. You look at not causing harm to others. Just, I'm not going to kill anybody, I'm not going to go beat somebody up, so that's easy. But then you see, no, there's a bigger world that involves. And so with the non-receiving of gifts. That's why for us who are monks, Swami Brahmananda, the disciple of Sri Ramakrishna, who was president of the order for many years, after the passing away of Swami Vivekananda, he used to tell the monks that the devotees are giving you food. It's because of their generosity that you have something to eat. So you have to do a portion of your spiritual practice for the sake of them. Because if you're not doing that, then you're stealing from them. And if you're doing just a little bit of spiritual practice, that all goes to them. It doesn't go to you. So you have to do enough spiritual practice that you're taking care of them as well as yourself. So now you have to eat. And if you're not, don't have a job making money and so forth, then somebody gives you food, and that's how monks generally eat, at least in the Indian tradition or the Buddhist tradition. And so you have to receive something from the people. And yes, those people may have some expectations when they give, and yet you have to, you can't starve yourself to death. You have to take it. But you have to remember that I have to make up for the fact that they deserve a portion of my spiritual practice. So I have to do something for them, and on top of that, I do for my own welfare. And so in the receiving of gifts, the whole world is based on give and take. So again, you can't completely avoid that in any situation unless you're living in the forest by yourself and growing all your own food and you have no contact with society. That's an extremely rare situation. But otherwise, we are dependent on each other, and there be some exchange. That's just part of nature. So you try to minimize that to accepting the things that you really need and not accepting things that have gross strings tied to them. But even then, you realize that in the exchange, I have to give something back. And only beyond that is what is going to benefit me. But I first have to give back my debt to the people who are supporting me, those people who are helping me. People who are nurturing me, who are protecting me, whatever. And it's one of the ideas behind taxation. Now, yes, there are many of the things that you might not like about taxation because of the use of the money for things that you don't believe in and so forth. But the idea that I'm getting so many things from society, the roads are being taken care of, the police are there to take care of protecting society, and so many other, the fire department and so many things are there for my welfare, I have to give something back to them. And so the whole of life is give and take. So I have to be careful about what I accept, so that it's what I really need and not what I don't need, so that it's not tied to things that are going to make me indebted to somebody. And even then, I have to do enough spiritual practice so I'm paying them back. That's the idea behind it's what's behind the idea in the Hindu tradition, the ancient practice, of every day you incur 5 debts, and that you have to pay those 5 debts back. Just by living, you're incurring 5 debts. One is to the gods, and the spiritual forces. You give back to them through worship and prayer. You are indebted to the ancient sages who have passed down the scriptures and spiritual knowledge as well as cultural knowledge, mathematics, sciences, all of that is passed down from the sages through the civilization. And so you give that back by studying give back to them by studying their works and by honoring them. You are indebted to your forebears, your forefathers, foremothers, for your very physical existence and for having brought you into the world, etc. You pay them back by honoring them and by living a worthy life so that you don't reflect badly on them. You owe something to all of humanity because they're providing so many things. The farmers, the workers, the truckers, everybody is providing something. So I owe something to them. So I pay that back by giving in charity to those who don't have enough. And you owe the animal and plant kingdom as well for all that they give you. And so I do that by being kind to animals and plants, taking care of them, those that are in my care. So the idea is that life is an exchange, and we do incur debts, and so we just have to be careful which debts, and not to incur debts that are going to affect us badly. So, here was it. Good.
Okay.
Yes.
Namaskar, Maharaj.
Namaskar.
So my question is actually relating to Swamiji's beautiful definition of religion, probably the most meaningful definition I have ever seen. Apparently it may not be related to just the processes that you have discussed, but maybe they are, because he has talked about yoga as one of the 4 paths also. So he says, of course, everybody knows each soul is potentially divine, and then he says the goal is to manifest this by controlling nature, external and internal. And then he talked about you can use all 4 paths or any of those and other things, maybe secondary details. So my question, this little question, is what he exactly meant by controlling nature external here? Or what by nature he meant?
Yes, now that's a good question, and one that we nowadays need to clarify, because or when we hear that today, when modern people hear that today, especially in the West, then because of the environmental degradation and because of the attacks on the environment and so forth, and the raping of the earth, and grabbing as much resources as we can without any thought for what the future is going to do as far as resources, then it sounds like controlling nature means what corporations and others are doing right now. No, it doesn't mean that. And of course, because of your question, it's obvious that you understand controlling internal nature. That means controlling your mind and so forth. But Swamiji said that the controlling external nature means making an environment for yourself which is livable. He says nature doesn't give you a house. You build a house. So he poo-pooed the superficial, what I would say, and he certainly said, it was a superficial Western idea of living in harmony with nature. He didn't poo-poo the idea, the higher idea of living in harmony, but the Western idea is that everything that man does, man meaning human beings, using it gender neutrally, that everything that man does is unnatural, and nature means everything excluding man and everything that man does. Well, no, Swamiji didn't agree with that. Everything is nature. Human beings are nature. We're part of nature. Just as the anthill is part of nature, so the buildings we build are part of nature. That divide between artificial and natural that we make is itself artificial. But understanding that, some things that we do poison the earth and poison other life and make life impossible to live. Swamiji certainly was not condoning that. He spoke out strongly against that. What he meant was that nature doesn't provide you a house, so you build a house. Nature pours rain on your head, and so you make an umbrella to protect yourself from the rain. Nature doesn't give you clothing, so you make clothing. Yes, you make it from things that are in nature, but nature doesn't, you don't walk out into the forest and there's a suit of clothes there waiting for you that nature made for you. No, you make clothing. And so controlling nature external means that you provide for yourself a livable situation that makes spiritual practice and the practice of yoga and ordinary civilized life possible. But he certainly was not not 5? That says 5. Okay, so my time is practically up. So let me get this question quickly.
Last question here.
Yeah, Bill's question.
Swami,
Just a moment. We need this further, it needs to be recorded.
It'll be quick, anyway.
Okay,
Swami,
good.
I'd like to,
Swami, I'd like to hear your comment on the following observation, and I'm directing your attention to 245.
245.
yeah,
It says in 245 that was surrendered to the self, Ishvara Pranadhanani, comes samadhi.
Yes,
Comes
yes.
samadhi. Okay, well, the 8th limb of the Ashtanga Yoga is samadhi.
Yes.
So the comment I'd like to hear from you is, it seems like the ethical foundation constitute the first step, but in a sense, if we really are profound in that first step, it's also the last step.
Yes.
So there's an interpenetration of these steps. What do you
Yes.
have to say about that?
No,
Thank
that's
you.
a very good point, and that's true of the whole system of yoga, that there's a lot of interpenetration. The usual idea is that you practice the 8 limbs one by one. You first practice the yamas, then you practice the niyamas, then you practice asana, then you practice all of them at a time. And now it's true that you can't practice pranayama well until you have mastered something of asana, so that you can sit still, so that the prana is flowing evenly and so forth. Then your pranayama, but you don't have to wait until you have mastered asana before you can even begin to practice pranayama. And you don't have to wait until you've practiced pranayama until you begin the practice of meditation. No, these are practiced simultaneously. There's a lot of interpenetration. Through further meditation, then you're even better at the yamas and niyamas. And so all of these are interconnected. And even just taking something like a virtue like truthfulness. Okay, I'm just going to be truthful. Like that Gandhiji said that truthfulness and ahimsa, those were the 2 principles he took. He said everything in his life were a result of just practicing those 2 things. All of his power as a leader and so forth came just from practicing truthfulness and ahimsa. So you can take just a virtue like that and give your life to it, and you'll find that it'll take you to spiritual beatitude. So yes, there is a great deal of interpenetration of these ideas and cross-referencing, so thank you for that. So I'll stop here.